Hello and welcome back to episode 8 of Not a Roadrunner. So this one doubles up as a how-to and it is all about spraying car parts. So this is sanding, primer, prep, top coat and clear coat. So I hope you enjoy the video, guys. I am indoors currently because the weather is not paint worthy, as you can see with all that wind. So I hope you enjoy the video, guys, and let's get to it.
First things first, you got to take off whatever car part you're planning on spraying. In order to remove the fan and fan clutch, you have to take off the 4 bolts, bolting it up to the water pump. Once you've done that, then you can start detaching the fan clutch from the fan. To remove the fan from the fan clutch, it's another 4 bolts, so some really tricky hardware here, guys. And a top tip that I mention in almost all of my videos, always put your hardware back in the threads just so you don't lose them and you know exactly what bolts are for what part. Is you want to clean off like all this dirt, and then you move on to the actual paint, which is more prominent on this side. So all of this, I'm just using 120 because that's literally all I have, and we're in lockdown at the minute, so I can't get hold of anything else. And then start spraying, and we'll just see how good the finish turns out. The key to painting is always in the prep work, so do not rush this step. Take your time and make sure you sand it all down so you get a nice grip with your primer. Ideally, a high grit sandpaper is better, but all I had was the 120, and I'll say that the finish actually turned out pretty well. So after finishing up on the nice and easy side, I moved on to the thick paint side. Once you've finished sanding, you need to hit it with some water, make sure it's all clean, and then do a wax and grease remover to make sure nothing ruins that new paint. After it's thorough cleaning, just let it dry for a couple hours in the sun to make sure it's ready for paint.
Then you're on to primer. Normally I go for 2 coats. Make sure you obviously shake it up a lot before, because you want to mix all the paint. Respirator mask, because lining your lungs with paint is really not fun. And just broad strokes, really, just nice and slow.
As this fan is definitely not a standard shape, I just took the approach of spraying each fan blade one at a time individually. Doing a light coat of primer on your first coat is always good because it helps with paint adhesion to start with. Do not expect the first coat to cover it over completely. I went for a first light coat and then a heavier coat on the second coat, but if you want to go for 3 lighter coats, that is completely fine, it all works the same. After finishing 2 coats on one side, I flipped it over and repeated the process. Once you're happy with your primer coverage, leave it to harden overnight. Because of the design I was going for, I only built up the colour yellow on the outside of the fan blades. The best approach to take is to block back or sand down the primer before you start on your top coat. All of the principles that we applied to the primer, so light coat first, then heavier coats, still apply, so you just have to paint it, and for me I had to turn it over and complete on the other side. Now, this is the part that you really do not want to rush. You want to let it dry and you want to let it harden before you start putting tape over it to mask it up. I had to mask up the corners because of the design I went for, but if you're just plain painting it, then this step you do not need. Definitely take your time and make sure all of your masking tape is all flattened down, just to make sure there's no paint bleed. So a part I touched on briefly earlier is shaking. Do not undershake your can. It always says 2 minutes, but I always go for 3 just to make sure that paint is a nice consistency. Another tip is, before you start painting your object, spray the paper below to make sure that there's no debris caught in your nozzle and therefore avoiding getting it on your object and ruining your new paint. Heat is definitely your friend when you're taking off your masking tape. Make sure it all dries perfectly beforehand, but then heat up the tape and pull away, and that stops it from pulling your paint up underneath. Now it is starting to look pretty mad, but we've got one last step, and that is clear coat. I always find that 2 to 3 layers of clear coat, dusted on lightly, builds up enough to protect whatever you're spraying. Now that we're all finished spraying, we just have to reinstall our hardware, so attaching the fan back to the fan clutch, and then we need to get it back in the car and see how it looks. Depending on what you're spraying, this can be tricky, so definitely take your time because you do not want to scratch your new paint before you've even got it in the car.
Now, I can't lie, I was pretty buzzed about how that turned out. I think it looks well cool while it's spinning. I think it looks really good when it's stationary as well. And when I finally get round to colour coding the whole engine bay, I reckon it's going to look really cool. So I hope you enjoyed that video, guys. If you did, please like, subscribe and share. And I will see you in the next episode of Not a Road Runner. Cheers, guys.